The massive doors of the Galactic Council's Supreme Chamber slid open with a sound like distant thunder, revealing a sight that would have made most beings from any civilized world fall to their knees in terror. Ambassador David Kane stepped through the threshold and found himself standing at the center of the largest governmental assembly in known galactic history. Rising in concentric circles around him were the representatives of over 300 alien species, each more imposing than the last. The throne speakers sat highest, their crystalline forms pulsing with energy that could level mountains. Below them, the Vorthak Empire's delegation displayed rows of razor-sharp teeth, while the mechanical collective's representatives clicked and whirred with sounds that hurt human ears. Floating in specialized atmospheric pods, the gas giant dwellers of Nebulous Prime observed with eyes that could see across multiple dimensions. This was power incarnate, the ruling body that had governed 1,000,000 worlds for over 2,000 years. Supreme Chancellor Kethavar raised one massive appendage, and the chamber fell silent. His voice, when it came through the universal translators, carried the weight of absolute authority. Human representative, you stand before the Galactic Council charged with the most serious violations possible. Your species has been found guilty of unauthorized expansion into 17 restricted sectors, interference with Council trade regulations, and most damning of all, the corruption of 12 member species, who have now abandoned their traditional allegiances. Kane looked around the chamber calmly, his hands clasped behind his back. Where any other species would have sent their most diplomatic representatives, humanity had chosen to send a former military strategist. The aliens had expected pleading or desperation. Instead, they found themselves facing a man who studied their formations with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating battlefield positions. The evidence against your species is overwhelming, continued High Judge Wexthal, her serpentine form coiling as she spoke. Your colonies have spread across space like a plague, ignoring boundary markers established by civilizations that predate your entire evolutionary history. You have corrupted the natural order that has maintained galactic peace for millennia. Holographic displays materialized around Kane, showing what the Council considered humanity's crimes. Human settlements thriving in regions marked as Council territory. Trade agreements that completely bypassed established tribute systems. Most disturbing to the assembled aliens were the images of other species working alongside humans as equals, rather than in the rigid hierarchical structures the Council demanded. Your crimes demand the ultimate punishment, declared War Marshal Drexmont, his battle-scarred carapace reflecting the chamber's lights. Orbital bombardment of your homeworld, followed by the systematic destruction of every human colony. Any surviving members of your species will serve as examples to others who might consider defying Council authority. The chamber erupted in agreement. Clicking, roaring, and harmonized tones of approval filled the air as hundreds of alien representatives voiced their support for humanity's extinction. Some called for immediate action. Others suggested prolonged suffering as a better deterrent. The Council had spoken and their verdict was death, but David Kane was smiling. Your Honor, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. Before you finalize this sentence, there's something you should understand about humanity's position in this galaxy. Supreme Chancellor Kethavar's eyes narrowed. No species had ever interrupted a Council verdict. The very concept was so alien that their protocols had no provisions for it. You will silence yourself, human, or face immediate execution. Kane reached into his diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small crystalline device. Every weapon detector in the chamber should have identified it as a threat. Every security protocol should have prevented its passage through the Council's defenses. Yet somehow it had gone completely unnoticed until this moment. This, Kane announced, holding the device aloft, is a quantum relay beacon. For the past 18 months, while you've been gathering evidence and preparing your case against humanity, we've been listening to every word spoken in this chamber, every secret meeting, every private communication, every strategic discussion about how to maintain your empire. Stunned silence fell over the chamber. The technological implications of what Kane was suggesting were staggering. The Council chambers were protected by the most advanced security systems in the galaxy, developed by their greatest scientists over centuries of refinement. Impossible, hissed High Judge Wexthal. Our security matrices were designed by the finest minds of 100 species. No primitive race could possibly penetrate them. Kane activated the device. Instantly, the chamber's displays flickered and changed, now showing feeds that made every alien representative's blood run cold. Real-time surveillance footage from inside their most secure facilities. Recordings of private conversations between council members discussing bribes, territorial divisions, and plans to eliminate rival species. Financial records showing the systematic exploitation of member worlds. But the most shocking revelations were yet to come. The display shifted to show massive human fleets stationed just outside the detection range of every major council world. Not the small, desperate armadas the council had expected to face, but organized battle groups that dwarfed anything in their military archives. Hundreds of ships using technology that shouldn't exist, crewed by beings from dozens of species that had supposedly remained loyal to the council. You see? Kane continued as panic began to spread through the assembled representatives.
While you were busy maintaining your empire through fear and oppression,
humanity was offering something different to your subject species. We offered them partnership instead of servitude, equality instead of hierarchy, hope instead of despair. The displays now showed thriving multi-species colonies where former council subjects worked alongside humans in perfect cooperation. Advanced technologies that had emerged from collaborative research between species the council had kept deliberately separated. Defensive installations around Earth that made the planet not a vulnerable target, but an impregnable fortress. War Marshal Dreximot stood, his massive frame trembling with rage. You dare threaten the council? Our fleets will reduce your pathetic worlds to ash and vapor. Kane's smile never wavered. Marshal, you misunderstand our position. We're not threatening the council. We're informing you that the war you've just declared has already been lost. The final display showed the council's own fleets, scattered across the galaxy in what they believed were secure positions. But surrounding each formation were ships bearing human markings, outnumbering the council forces by margins that made resistance pointless. Worse still, many of the ships in those council fleets were broadcasting surrender requests, their crews choosing to abandon an empire that had never valued them. The question now, Kane said quietly, his words carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, isn't whether you'll try to destroy humanity. The question is whether humanity will allow any of you to survive what comes next. In the horrible silence that followed, as alien representatives began to comprehend the full scope of their situation, David Kane looked around the chamber one final time. These beings had ruled through fear for 2 millennia, convinced that power flowed from the ability to inflict suffering. They had never encountered a species that wielded something far more dangerous than weapons. They had never faced the devastating power of hope. And now, for the first time in galactic history, the hunters had become the hunted. Admiral Rebecca Foster stood on the command bridge of the UES Defiance, watching through the massive viewing ports as the Council's home fleet approached their position. Around her, officers from 7 different species worked in perfect coordination, their various physiologies and cognitive abilities creating a symphony of efficiency that would have been impossible under the old galactic order. The irony was not lost on her that the Council had spent 2,000 years keeping these species apart, never realizing the incredible potential that lay in their cooperation. Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Trix, his Altarian vocal cords producing harmonics that human ears couldn't detect, but which carried complex tactical data to his fellow crewmates. We're receiving surrender requests from 47 Council vessels. They're asking for terms. Foster's expression remained carefully neutral as she considered the implications. Each surrender represented not just a military asset changing sides, but entire crews of beings choosing hope over the familiar certainty of oppression. Open a channel to all Council forces in the system. I want every ship to hear this. The communications array activated, and Foster's image was broadcast to thousands of alien crew members across dozens of species. On Council ships throughout the system, beings who had never seen a human outside of propaganda footage found themselves looking at someone who spoke to them not as subjects, but as equals. This is Admiral Foster of the Human Liberation Coalition, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the void of space. 72 hours ago, your leaders gathered in their grand chamber to pass judgment on my species. They found us guilty of the greatest crime imaginable in their minds, offering hope to the hopeless. Today we return that judgment. On the bridge of the Council flagship Eternal Authority, High Admiral Vorthkan watched the transmission with growing disbelief. His tactical displays showed the impossible. His mighty fleet, the pride of Council military might, was completely surrounded by vessels that had appeared from nowhere. Ships using technologies his scientists insisted were decades away from practical deployment, crewed by species that were supposed to be loyal to the Council. How did they achieve such numbers without our intelligence networks detecting them? He demanded of his aide, a nervous Kylothian whose feathers were molting from stress. The aide consulted his datapad with trembling appendages. "Sir, our preliminary scans suggest they're using quantum stealth technology combined with dimensional phase shifting. According to our best theoretical models, such systems would require the combined industrial output of 50-star systems working in perfect coordination for at least a decade." "Get me Captain Morvex," Vorthkan snarled. "If anyone can break through their formations, it's the commander of the Annihilation Protocol." But when the communication link opened, Captain Morvex appeared on screen with his weapon harnesses removed and his crew standing peacefully behind him. "Admiral," he said with obvious embarrassment, "my ship has been contacted by the Human Coalition. They've made an offer." Vorthkan's rage was immediate and terrible. "You've been compromised, corrupted by human lies. I'll have you executed for treason." "No, Admiral," Morvex replied quietly. "They offered us something the Council never did. They told us about our families on the frontier worlds, families we thought were dead. My daughter graduated from their academy last month. With honors. She's working as an engineer on one of their deep space stations, treated as an equal member of their crew." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Vorthkan staring at a tactical display that grew more hopeless by the minute. Ship after ship in his fleet was broadcasting surrender signals, their crews choosing the unknown promise of human cooperation over the familiar brutality of Council discipline. Back aboard the Defiance, Admiral Foster continued her broadcast. "For 2,000 years, the Galactic Council has maintained order through fear and oppression. They've convinced entire civilizations that hierarchy is natural, that some species are born to rule while others must serve. They've made you believe that questioning their authority leads only to chaos and destruction." The camera pulled back to show the bridge around her, revealing the seamless cooperation between humans and aliens that the Council had insisted was impossible. Beings from species that had been traditional enemies worked side by side, their different abilities combining to create something greater than the sum of its parts. "But look around you," Foster continued. "See what we've built in just 4 years. Not through conquest, but through cooperation. Not through fear, but through mutual respect. Every species that has joined our coalition has done so voluntarily, because we offer something the Council never could, a future where your worth isn't determined by your homeworld's military strength." The transmission shifted to show data streams that painted a picture of unprecedented galactic cooperation, trade networks that functioned without tribute or exploitation, scientific research programs that had achieved breakthrough after breakthrough. By combining the unique perspectives of multiple species, cultural exchanges that had created new forms of art, music, and a literature that transcended the boundaries of any single civilization. In the Council's emergency bunker, the remaining leadership watched the transmission in horrified fascination. What Foster was describing violated every principle they had used to maintain galactic stability for millennia. If such cooperation was truly possible, if species could work together as equals rather than in strict hierarchical relationships, then everything they had built was based on a lie. That's when Dr. Patricia Reynolds stepped into view beside Foster, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding across the galaxy. The aliens recognized her as the human scientist who had visited their worlds over the past several years, supposedly conducting cultural research. "Not years," Dr. Reynolds said with a slight smile as if reading their thoughts. "We've been planning this transition for quite some time. But the key wasn't time. It was understanding something the Council never grasped. True loyalty cannot be enforced, only earned." She gestured to a holographic display that showed the timeline of human diplomatic missions dating back 5 years. "While your leaders were focused on maintaining their empire through military dominance, we were building relationships. We listened to the complaints of your frontier worlds. We offered solutions to problems you had ignored. We treated your lesser species as equals and discovered their remarkable capabilities. The display showed human colonies where former council subjects had developed revolutionary technologies, created art that spanned multiple species' aesthetic sensibilities, and established communities that thrived without the constant threat of punishment or exploitation. You called it corruption, Dr. Reynolds continued. We called it liberation. Every species has unique strengths that have been suppressed under your system. When allowed to flourish and combine with others, the results exceed anything possible under forced hierarchy. Admiral Foster stepped forward again. The war you declared has already ended, not with the destruction you're accustomed to inflicting, but with a choice every ship, every world, every individual must now make. Continue serving an empire built on oppression, or join a coalition built on cooperation and mutual respect. As her words echoed across the communication networks, something unprecedented began to happen. Across the Council fleet, alien commanders found themselves facing an impossible decision. Fight a war they couldn't win for leaders who had never valued them, or surrender to an enemy who offered them dignity and equality. One by one, Council ships began powering down their weapons and broadcasting surrender signals. Not from fear of destruction, but from the promise of something better. Crews that had served the Council for generations discovered that they had been fighting not for order, but for their own oppression. As Foster's transmission ended and the tactical displays showed ship after ship joining the human coalition, High Admiral Vorthkin finally understood the true scope of what they faced. Humanity hadn't just defeated them militarily. They had made the very concept of the Council's authority irrelevant. For the first time in 2 millennia, the Galactic Council faced an enemy they couldn't intimidate, couldn't crush, and couldn't understand, the irresistible power of hope freely given. And in that moment, they realized that their empire hadn't been conquered. It had simply been abandoned by everyone who had ever believed in something better. Deep beneath the surface of Nexus Prime, in the Council's most secure emergency bunker, the surviving leadership of the once mighty Galactic Empire huddled around a war table that had once coordinated the conquest of entire star systems. Supreme Chancellor Keithvar's massive form cast long shadows in the flickering emergency lighting, while High Judge Wexthul's serpentine coils writhed with barely controlled panic. The bunker that had been designed to withstand the collapse of civilizations now felt like nothing more than an elaborate tomb. Status report, Keithvar demanded, though his voice carried none of its former imperial authority. General Rexthor, the Council's supreme military commander, activated a holographic display that painted a picture of total catastrophe. We've lost direct contact with 73% of our fleet. Not destroyed, Supreme Chancellor. Defected. Another 19% are requesting permission to negotiate surrender terms. The remaining vessels are trapped in blockades they cannot break through. What about our homeworlds? Asked High Judge Wexthul, her voice tight with desperation. Surely our planetary defense systems can maintain order until we can reorganize our forces. Rexthor's expression grew even more grim. That situation is complicated. The humans aren't invading in any conventional sense. They're broadcasting what they call liberation frequencies to every populated world in Council space. The signals bypass our communication networks entirely. We have no way to block or intercept them. Keithvar slammed one massive fist against the table, causing the holographic displays to flicker. What exactly are these transmissions containing? Truth, said a calm voice from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. Everyone turned in shock as Dr. Patricia Reynolds stepped into the light, flanked by 2 human officers. Somehow, impossibly, she had penetrated the most secure facility in the galaxy without triggering a single alarm or detection system. How did you breach our security? Keithvar demanded, his voice a mixture of rage and fear. The same way we've been accomplishing everything else, Dr. Reynolds replied calmly, settling into a chair at their war table as if she had been invited. With the help of people you've forgotten existed. She gestured, and several figures emerged from concealment around the chamber. Maintenance workers, security guards, cleaning staff. Beings from dozens of species who had served the Council for years, invisible in their mundane roles, completely overlooked by leaders who saw only military commanders and planetary governors. You see? Dr. Reynolds continued, activating her own holographic display. While you were focused on controlling your military leaders and keeping your member species in line, we were talking to the real power in any civilization. The people who actually make everything work. The display showed scenes from across the galaxy that made the Council leadership's worst fears seem trivial by comparison. On world after world, populations weren't rising up in violent revolution. Instead, they were simply stopping. Miners refusing to extract resources for Council tribute, factory workers declining to manufacture weapons, citizens choosing not to report for military conscription, entire planetary infrastructures grinding to a halt through peaceful non-compliance. What you're witnessing, Dr. Reynolds explained with scholarly precision, is the galaxy's first truly peaceful revolution. It turns out that when you offer people a genuine alternative to oppression, they don't need to fight their oppressors. They simply walk away. General Rexthor studied the displays with growing horror. The supply lines, without the frontier worlds producing raw materials and the industrial centers manufacturing equipment. Your war machine stops functioning, Dr. Reynolds finished. It's remarkable how quickly an empire collapses when it can no longer feed itself or maintain its equipment. The displays shifted to show specific examples that drove the point home with devastating clarity. On Kelthera 7, the Council's primary weapon manufacturing world, workers had simply laid down their tools and walked out of the factories. They hadn't destroyed anything or engaged in sabotage. They had just stopped working. Within hours, human ships had arrived carrying supplies, medical aid, and most importantly, transport off-world for anyone who wanted to leave for the human colonies. On Vorthak Prime, the warrior culture that had served as the Council's primary military enforcers for over a millennium faced a choice no battle had ever prepared them for. Human diplomats had arrived not with weapons or threats, but with intelligence about their missing warriors, sons and daughters who had supposedly died gloriously in battle, but who had actually been abandoned on failed missions the Council deemed too expensive to support. You're offering them fantasies, High Judge Wexthul accused, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. Promises you cannot possibly keep. What happens when the reality of governing such diverse populations sets in? When the resource conflicts begin? When the cultural incompatibilities lead to violence? Dr. Reynolds smiled and activated a new series of displays that showed human colonies scattered across the galaxy. But these weren't the desperate frontier settlements the Council had expected to find. Instead, they revealed thriving multi-species communities, where beings from dozens of different worlds lived and worked together, in apparent harmony. This is New Geneva Station, she said, highlighting a massive space habitat, built in 22 months by joint human-Altarian engineering teams. It houses 3 million beings from 18 different species. Crime rate, virtually zero. Productivity, nearly 5 times that of comparable Council installations. Satisfaction index, off every measurement scale we've developed. Impossible, General Rexthor muttered. Different species cannot coexist peacefully on that scale. The biological incompatibilities, the cultural conflicts, the competition for resources, only exist when you're forcing everyone to fight over limited resources, Dr. Reynolds interrupted gently. When abundance is available and everyone has a genuine stake in success, those incompatibilities become strengths. Diversity isn't a problem to be managed. It's an advantage to be leveraged. The display shifted to show another human innovation that challenged everything the Council believed about interspecies cooperation. Mixed crews working together in perfect harmony, their different biological and cognitive capabilities complementing each other in ways that produced results far exceeding the sum of their individual abilities. On Council ships, Dr. Reynolds noted, you segregate crews by species, convinced that mixing leads to conflict and inefficiency. Our vessels have Altarian navigators whose quantum perception abilities are enhanced by human intuition, Kitherian engineers whose mathematical precision is guided by Vorthak tactical thinking, and Nexari communication specialists who can coordinate with species you consider too primitive for meaningful contact. Supreme Chancellor Kethvar listened to this recitation with growing unease. Everything Dr. Reynolds described violated fundamental principles the Council had used to maintain galactic order for 2 millennia. If she was telling the truth about the possibilities of interspecies cooperation, you're describing chaos, he said finally. Without clear hierarchy, without established dominance patterns, without the discipline of controlled scarcity, civilizations collapse into anarchy and violence. This is basic sociology. Chancellor, Dr. Reynolds replied with gentle patience. With respect, your understanding of civilization is 2,000 years out of date. You've been so focused on maintaining the status quo that you've missed the most important development in galactic history, the evolution of consciousness itself. She gestured to her human companions. Meet Commander Thomas Blake, formerly of the UES Harmony. He's been working with teams of Nixari philosophers and Altarian consciousness researchers to develop what we call collective intelligence, protocols, methods for different species to temporarily merge their cognitive abilities and perspectives. And this is Captain Maria Santos, she continued, indicating her other companion. She's been coordinating with former Council logistics specialists to create supply chains that function without central control or enforcement. Every participant benefits from the system's success, so everyone has incentive to maintain and improve it. The implications of what she was describing hit the Council leadership like a physical blow. If humans had truly solved the fundamental problems of multi-species cooperation, if they had developed methods for creating abundance rather than managing scarcity, if they had found ways to harness diversity rather than suppress it, your reign, Dr. Reynolds said quietly, wasn't ended by military force or political maneuvering. It was rendered obsolete by innovation. As if to underscore her point, alerts began sounding throughout the bunker. The displays showed scenes from the surface of Nexus Prime that defied everything the Council thought they knew about their own people. Populations were emerging from their homes not in panic or fear, but in celebration. Human ships, we doctor. Reynolds stood and walked to the bunker's main display, which showed the scenes of celebration continuing across the capital city. Humans and aliens embraced like long-lost family members sharing in the Council's emergency session chamber, now illuminated only by the cold glow of emergency lighting after the main power systems had been diplomatically disconnected by sympathetic engineers, the last 15 representatives of the once mighty Galactic Council faced a reality that none of them had ever imagined possible. Supreme Chancellor Kethvar stood before a massive holographic map that showed the empire they had built over 2 millennia, dissolving like morning mist before the rising sun. Red indicators marked worlds in open rebellion against Council authority. Yellow showed star systems under human protection. Green indicated planets that had formally joined humanity's coalition. But most disturbing of all were the growing number of gray markers, worlds that had simply gone completely dark, choosing total independence over allegiance to either side in what they saw as a conflict between 2 galactic powers. Report, Kethvar commanded, though his voice carried none of the imperial authority that had once made entire star systems tremble. Intelligence Director Korthmel, one of the few high-ranking officials who hadn't fled the capital or defected to the human coalition, manipulated the holographic display with trembling appendages. Supreme Chancellor, the situation has evolved far beyond conventional military parameters. We're facing something completely unprecedented in galactic history. Voluntary dissolution of governmental authority. Explain that statement, Kethvar demanded. The humans aren't conquering our territories through conventional means. They're making them irrelevant. Every world that joins their coalition immediately gains access to technologies and resources that render Council membership obsolete. They're not winning through superior firepower, they're winning by making warfare itself unnecessary. The display zoomed in on Thaldor Beta, a former mining world that had supplied rare crystalline compounds essential to Council war machines. 5 days ago, human engineers had arrived with molecular replication technology that could synthesize those same compounds using nothing more than stellar hydrogen and basic elements. Overnight, Thaldor Beta's strategic value had completely vanished. They're not just winning this war, Korthmel continued with obvious confusion. They're rewriting the fundamental rules that made war necessary in the first place. High Judge Wexthal's serpentine form coiled with agitation. This violates every principle of galactic dynamics that has governed civilization for millennia. Scarcity drives competition. Competition maintains order and progress. Without struggle and hierarchy, civilizations stagnate and collapse into chaos. This is fundamental law. That's what we believed, said a familiar voice. Dr. Patricia Reynolds entered the chamber again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her walked representatives from every major species in the galaxy. But these weren't the usual terrified or defeated figures the Council was accustomed to seeing. These beings carried themselves with dignity, confidence, and most unsettling of all, genuine sympathy for their former oppressors, Dr. Reynolds, Kethvar said, his massive frame slumping with exhaustion. Have you come to witness our final humiliation? Actually, Chancellor, we came to offer you a choice. A real choice, not an ultimatum disguised as diplomacy. The Council representatives exchanged glances of disbelief. In 2,000 years of rule, they had never been offered genuine choices. They gave ultimatums and received compliance. The concept of voluntary decision-making in matters of galactic importance was completely foreign to their understanding of how power functioned. Dr. Reynolds activated her personal holographic projector, filling the chamber with images of thriving multi-species communities across the galaxy. But these weren't the carefully staged propaganda displays the Council was familiar with. These were real-time feeds showing genuine prosperity, happiness, and cooperation on a scale that defied their understanding of interspecies relations. What you're seeing, Dr. Reynolds explained, is what happens when civilizations evolve beyond zero-sum thinking. For 2 millennia, you've maintained order by convincing everyone that resources were fundamentally limited, that one species' gain required another's loss. That hierarchy was the only alternative to chaos, but that was never actually true. Impossible, snapped General Rex Thor. The laws of physics dictate that matter and energy are finite. Scarcity is a fundamental reality of the universe. The laws of physics, interrupted Dr. Sarah Kim, stepping forward from Reynolds's group, are far more generous than your science has realized. Allow me to introduce our Chief Technology Officer. She's been working with Altarian quantum theorists and Nexari space-time mathematicians to develop what we call abundance protocols. Dr. Kim gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show massive space-based installations that seemed to pull unlimited energy and matter directly from the quantum vacuum itself. Zero-point energy extraction on an industrial scale, matter synthesis from quantum foam fluctuations, faster-than-light communication using quantum entanglement networks. All theoretical impossibilities according to Council science, but routine realities in our space. How is such advancement possible? Whispered Intelligence Director Korthmel. Our greatest scientists and engineers have spent centuries trying to develop even basic versions of such technologies. Your scientists, Dr. Kim replied with gentle respect, were brilliant individuals working in isolation, competing for limited resources and recognition within rigid hierarchical systems. Our breakthroughs came from collective intelligence, thousands of minds from dozens of species working together freely, sharing insights and building on each other's discoveries without fear or competition. The implications of what she was describing hit the Council leadership like a tsunami of realization. If humanity had truly solved the fundamental scarcity problems that had driven galactic conflict for millennia, if they had found ways to harness the creative potential of cooperative research rather than competitive secrecy, your choice is simple, Dr. Reynolds continued. You can continue fighting a war you've already lost, clinging to a system that no longer serves anyone's interests. Your remaining loyal worlds will eventually abandon you as they see the prosperity their neighbors are achieving. Your fleets will continue defecting as their crews realize they're fighting to preserve their own oppression. She paused, letting that reality sink in completely. Or, she continued, you can choose to evolve with us, to become part of something larger and more beautiful than anything your empire ever achieved. Kethavar's laugh was bitter and hollow. You expect us to simply surrender? To bow before human superiority and accept our place as subordinates in your new order? Chancellor, said Commander Lisa Wong, another human officer who stepped forward. You fundamentally misunderstand what we're offering. We're not asking you to bow to human superiority. We're inviting you to discover your own potential that your own system has been suppressing for 2,000 years. The holographic display shifted again, showing detailed analysis of each Council species' unique capabilities, abilities that had been ignored or deliberately suppressed under the current Imperial system. Vorthak warriors, Wong explained, aren't just effective fighters. They have an intuitive understanding of tactical dynamics and strategic patterns that could revolutionize everything, from urban planning to ecosystem management. But your system has only used them for violence and intimidation. Altarian mathematicians don't just calculate numbers, they process probability and possibility. in ways that could predict and prevent disasters across the galaxy. But you've restricted them to weapons research and taxation, calculations. Nexari empaths aren't just useful for interrogation, they have natural abilities for conflict resolution and emotional healing that could end psychological trauma on a galactic scale. But you've used them only for extracting information through suffering. As Wong spoke, representatives from each species stepped forward. No longer the broken or fearful figures they had been under Council rule. These beings radiated confidence, purpose, and genuine enthusiasm for the work they were now free to pursue. Every species in this galaxy, Wong concluded, has been operating at a fraction of their potential because your system required them to suppress their greatest strengths to avoid threatening your hierarchical control. Supreme Chancellor Kethvar looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. For the first time in his very long life, he saw them not as the masters of the galaxy, but as prisoners of a system they had created and maintained through fear of change. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked quietly. Dr. Reynolds smiled with genuine warmth. "Individual choice for every being in the galaxy. Your species, your worlds, your remaining fleets, they can all join our coalition as complete equals. No subordination. No tribute to use their experience to help others avoid the mistakes they made. Your knowledge of galactic governance could be invaluable in building something better. Or," Commander Wong added, "you can retire to NEW." 8 months after the last Council warship had powered down its weapons and joined humanity's coalition, former Supreme Chancellor Kethvar stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching something that would have been impossible under the old galactic order. Through the massive, transparent walls, he could see engineering teams from 12 different species working together to install quantum communication arrays while Nexari mathematicians calculated optimal traffic patterns for vessels from over 40 different civilizations. The sight still amazed him daily. "Still difficult to accept, isn't it?" asked Dr. Patricia Reynolds, joining him at the viewing wall. Kethvar's massive form shifted as he considered the peaceful bustle of activity outside. "I keep expecting it to collapse, for the old conflicts to reassert themselves, for chaos to emerge when central authority isn't there to enforce order. And yet, Kethvar admitted with something approaching wonder, productivity on this station exceeds anything we achieved with our most advanced facilities under the old system. Crime is virtually non-existent. Satisfaction surveys show happiness levels that we never recorded in 2,000 years of Council rule." Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "It turns out that when people aren't fighting over limited resources, when they're not afraid of punishment for innovation or cooperation, they have enormous energy for creative and productive pursuits." The former chancellor activated a personal display panel, showing statistics that continued to surprise him, even after months of review. Resource abundance across all human-allied territories. Technological advancement proceeding at exponential rates. Most shocking of all, former Council worlds reporting satisfaction and prosperity indices that dwarfed anything from their imperial days. The Vorthak delegation requested another consultation session, Kethvar said, changing the subject to his new role as a cultural integration advisor, a position he had chosen over comfortable retirement. They want to discuss expanding their warrior traditions into what they're calling protective arts and competitive athletics. Competition without conquest, Reynolds mused. Combat sports instead of warfare. Physical excellence pursued for its own sake rather than to inflict suffering. It's remarkable how quickly they've adapted to channeling their natural abilities in constructive directions. Through the viewing wall, they could see a massive recreational complex where Vorthak warriors engaged in elaborate martial displays with volunteers from other species, not in deadly combat, but in graceful demonstrations that showcased skill, honor, and physical beauty without anyone suffering harm. Crowds of mixed species cheered enthusiastically for their favorites, placing friendly wagers on outcomes that enhanced everyone's enjoyment without diminishing anyone's dignity. Admiral Foster wanted to brief you on the deep space exploration initiatives, Kethvar continued. The joint fleets are reporting coact before we've even reached their territories. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. And they're not requesting contact with humanity specifically? No, Kethvar admitted, still adjusting to the revolutionary concept. They're requesting contact with the coalition as a whole. as equals seeking to join something larger than themselves. This was perhaps the most radical transformation of all. Under the old system, first contact had always meant determining dominance relationships, which species would rule and which would serve. But humanity's model had completely rewritten those ancient patterns. New civilizations weren't being conquered or absorbed. They were being invited to contribute their unique perspectives and abilities to an ever-growing community of cooperation. Former General Rexthor sends his regards. By the way, Kithvar added with something approaching humor, his logistics optimization work on the Outer Rim stations has reduced supply delivery times by 70% while cutting resource waste to almost zero. And he's content with civilian applications of his skills? More than content, he's genuinely excited. It turns out that military efficiency and precision apply beautifully to peaceful infrastructure projects when you're not constrained by the need to maintain artificial scarcity or plan for constant conflict. They were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Maria Santos, now serving as Harmony Station's coordination officer. Her mixed-species crew had become the template for integration protocols being implemented across the galaxy. Chancellor Dr. Reynolds, she greeted them warmly. The quarterly reports are ready for review. I thought you'd want to see the latest numbers personally. She activated a comprehensive holographic display that filled the observation deck with cascading streams of data. Production figures that exceeded all projections. Scientific breakthroughs occurring at rates that would have been impossible under the competitive secrecy of the old system. Art, music, and literature emerging from multi-species collaborations that created entirely new forms of expression, transcending the limitations of any single culture. Most interesting, Santos continued, are the psychological and sociological studies. Former High Judge Wexthol's research on collective consciousness enhancement. The former High Judge is conducting research. Kethvar interrupted with surprise. Leading a major research initiative, actually. It turns out that serpentine neural structures have natural capabilities for linking consciousness across species barriers. She's working with human psychologists and Altarian cognition specialists to develop enhanced cooperation, protocols that could revolutionize how different species interact. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The beings who had once ruled through division and competition were now pioneering new methods of unity and collaboration. What about resistance to the new systems? Dr. Reynolds asked. Surely some groups still reject the cooperative paradigm? Less than 1% galaxy-wide, Santos reported. And most of that appears to be generational. Older individuals who spent their entire lives under scarcity-based systems struggling to adapt to abundance and cooperation. We've established transition communities to help with psychological adjustment. Transition communities, Kethvar mused. Under the Council, resistance meant re-education facilities or execution. Under the Coalition, Santos corrected gently, resistance means someone needs help understanding their options. Most opposition dissolves once people realize they're not being forced to change. They're being offered opportunities to grow and discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. Through the viewing wall, a new vessel approached the station, a ship of completely unfamiliar design but broadcasting Coalition identification codes. Another first contact situation, now handled as routine diplomatic procedure rather than military threat assessment. The Etherian delegation, Santos explained. They've been observing our activities for several months. Today they're making formal application to join the Coalition as full partners. Do we know anything about their capabilities or intentions? Kethvar asked, old diplomatic habits reasserting themselves. Some preliminary information, Santos replied. They appear to have natural time perception abilities that could revolutionize our understanding of temporal mechanics and causality. But more importantly, they've spent millennia developing what they call harmony technologies, methods for synchronizing different biological and mental rhythms across species barriers. In other words, Dr. Reynolds added with satisfaction, they're not just joining us, they're bringing unique capabilities that will benefit everyone in the Coalition while discovering new applications for abilities that isolation had limited. They watched the Etherian ship dock and its crew emerge, to be greeted warmly by representatives from dozens of species. Kethvar felt something he was still learning to identify. Genuine optimism about the future that wasn't based on control or dominance. Dr. Reynolds, he said quietly. "I must ask something that still troubles me. What happens when the Coalition encounters something truly hostile? A species that genuinely cannot be reasoned with? That rejects cooperation and chooses only conquest and destruction?" Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, watching the peaceful exchange taking place at the docking bay, where beings from across the galaxy welcomed the newest members of their growing family. "Chancellor," she said finally, 4 years ago the galaxy would have described humanity exactly that way. Unreasonable, aggressive, incapable of following established order. The Council was absolutely certain we could only be dealt with through overwhelming force and harsh punishment. She turned to face him directly. "Maybe the question isn't what we'll do when we encounter true hostility. Maybe the question is whether true hostility actually exists, or whether it's just another form of pain and fear that we haven't learned to heal yet." As if to emphasize her point, soft chimes echoed throughout the station. But these weren't warnings of danger. They were notifications of celebration. Across the galaxy, another former Council territory had officially joined the Coalition, its population choosing hope and cooperation over the familiar patterns of competition and fear. And in that moment, as they watched beings from